All right, we are now streaming live. So I want to welcome everybody to the September 15th Virtual Policy Committee meeting. I would like to start off by reintroducing ourselves. It's been quite a number of months since we've all met. We've lots of other things going on in the district and lots of faces on the screen here. So maybe for the benefit of those watching, I can just briefly introduce, call out who's on the meeting with us. And I'm just going to go in order of who I see on the tiles, if that's okay. I see our solicitor, Mr. Diazio. I welcome our student representative back, Avery Ciato. I would like to say hello to our teacher representative, Mrs. Andrea McMenamin, our board members, Liz Duffy, Susan Stern, and Jeff Jubileer. There he is. And Mr. Batchelor's here. Dr. Hand, you're joining our meeting today, or I just see your picture, I'm not sure, but Dr. Hand's on the screen. Our business manager, Mrs. Deco, our human resources director, Mr. Stitzel. And then of course we have our two administrative liaisons, one transitioning out, one transitioning on. Transitioning out is Dr. Stevenson and transitioning in is Mr. Regal. So I hope I've captured everybody and just want to say welcome, thank you, and happy birthday to Mr. Jubileer while we're at it. I'd like to
Wouldn't want to be anywhere else, friends. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
So let's get into.
Now we're worried about you.
Okay, so that was a nice way to say, oh, look at the balloon. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our administrative liaisons. I'm not sure who's going to take it from here. I think Mr. Regal to walk us through the administrative remarks that you have for this evening's meeting.
It is my pleasure to let Anthony do this so I can do a next meeting. How's that?
Okay.
So yes, Mr. Regal, thank you, Chairperson Goldman. Mr. Regal is going to be the new face of the administrative liaison for this committee. For the last few months, we've been working with our solicitor going through the process, and he will be an excellent addition to this process. Mr. Regal, as he said, tonight, I will walk us through the administrative remarks and explain our guests, administrative guests who are here. First of all, our business administrators here, if there's any questions from the AR that I'm about to discuss, and our Director of HR, Mr. Stitzel, is here. He is the administrative liaison for Title IX, and when our solicitor talks more about that with the committee, if there are any questions, Mr. Stitzel will also be available. So first of all, in the administrative, as you can see in the administrative remarks, there are three ARs that we wanted to bring to your attention because there were some changes. As you know, the ARs are not like policies that requires a vote from the recommendation from the committee and a final vote from the board. However, it is our tradition to bring both the committee and the board to apprise them of any changes that we make, so that you are aware for your final decisions for policies and other related items. The ARs that we have before you today are, number one is AR 610, which is procurement, which, as you see in your documents, that this was made by the leadership of our business administrator to make some changes, some wording changes to make it to bring it up to date. And the other two, AR 247, anti-hazing, and AR 249, bullying. Again, these were changes that were made to make them up to date as well, that our solicitor will tie in one with, particularly with Title IX. And if there are any questions about those, we can answer those before moving on. You're on mute, Chairman Goldman.
Oh, thank you very much. So thank you very much for that background, Dr. Stevenson. And I'd like to open it up just to see if, starting with our student representative and teacher representative, if you have any questions about the administrative regulations that are on the agenda tonight. Mrs. McMenamin said no. Avery, do you have any questions?
I did have one. Let me just scroll to the page quickly. In AR 249, so everybody flip to that. I just had a question of like why in the hazing AR we have a portion that talks about if employees like ignore the case, condone it, or engage in it, there are certain like repercussions for them. But in this one with the bullying, we like don't address that. And I was curious just to know like why we left out that section.
So I will defer to our solicitor.
Sure. So I'm looking at AR 249 here. What I do see is there's language that it states that employees that fail to report known instances of bullying shall be subject to discipline. I also see, Avery, what you mentioned, how it's worded slightly different in the hazing AR. There's not necessarily a reason for that. It may have just, I don't think there's a real legal reason one way or the other. We can make that change if that's something that the group would like to see. Really what we did with 247 and 249 was to clarify some of the reporting procedures. Otherwise, we didn't actually do a comprehensive review of these ARs because they had just been looked at back in 2019. But that's certainly something that there's nothing prohibiting us from saying the language in 247. There's nothing prohibiting us from putting that in 249. So if that's something that the committee would be interested in, we can definitely do that.
Okay, that was, thank you, Avery, for pointing that out. We can get committee feedback on your comment there. Do you have any other questions about the AR at either of the ARs at this point?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right, great. So let me then turn it to Mr. Jubileer. Do you have any questions at this point about the ARs? Do you have any feedback on what Avery put forth in terms of a comment about that AR?
No, I don't have any questions. I haven't spent much time seeing the delineation. My concern is in intent. So I'm probably comfortable with language as long as the intent is the same and they're equal in terms of its reporting. If it's a language issue, I probably am, as long as it's not material, I'm fine with an adjustment. But I have no other questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Liz, do you have any questions or feedback, thoughts on what Avery put forth as I don't know if it was a suggestion, but it was a question that could be a suggestion.
Yeah, I guess I'd echo what Jeff said. I mean, I don't have a problem with the intent. I guess, we have looked at some policies. I think we're looking to have consistent language. So maybe it does make sense to have the same kind of language when we're talking about a reporting mechanism. So I mean, I'd be open to that. I don't know how much if it's just language, having it consistent, but I kind of defer to group opinion on whether that's, we are on the approval stage, right? Or we don't have to approve it. That's right. It's an AR.
No, but it's, it can be until the policy work is done. The AR doesn't get posted generally until the corresponding policy work is done. Did you have any other questions about the ARs?
No.
No? Okay, Susan?
My only comment is I actually thought that this part of the agenda was just informational, that I would prefer to not get in the habit of commenting on ARs personally, unless they're associated with a brand new policy or some big substantial change. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay. So All right, well, I had just a couple questions on one of the ARs anyway, just from a copy editing standpoint, but I will take those offline and share those with the administrative liaison separately. And we can also talk about Avery's idea separately as well. But thank you. I know that those administrative regulations were changed in response to Title IX, like Dr. Stevenson said. And so that's just a part of the puzzle. This is a new format for us to actually have the administrative regulations laid out like this in the agenda. We were giving it a try to see if that would be a clearer way to present any changes as opposed to just having them mentioned in administrative remarks without having them actually laid out on the agenda. So I don't think that necessarily prompted more conversation than is typical, but I just wanted to remind people that that is a new format for us that we were giving a little bit of a go today. So with that, let's move on then to public comment, and I'll see who is, I don't know who's monitoring public comment today, but do we have any?
I'll check and see if we have any. And I would say move on from it now. It doesn't look like we have any as of now for policy, but I'll check it for at the end.
Okay, so then next up would be the approval of our minutes from our June 2nd policy meeting. Has everybody, Liz, Jeff, Susan, have you had a chance to look at the minutes? Any questions or concerns around the minutes? Anybody? No? Okay. All I wanted to just mention, and I don't know, I guess it's Patty who took the minutes, is there is something at the end where it says public comment. There's a line underneath that says no new business. That looked a little different to me. I think it might have been a typo, but I can take that up later, but I just wanted to make note of that. So with that said, we can move on into the meat of the agenda, which is item 4.1, policy 613, cooperative purchasing. This is a policy up for its second reading for repeal. So Dr. Stevenson, would you like to give us some remarks on this one?
Yes, thank you. This, as Chairperson Goldman said, this policy 613 is up for repeal, and it was language about cooperative purchasing, which was appropriately discussed in board policy 610, procurement, and therefore is duplicate language is unnecessary. Therefore, we are recommending that this moves forward to the full board at the September regular business meeting for a second reading, which is a repeal.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody on the committee or student representative, teacher representative, anybody have an issue with moving this forward for its second reading? Nope, I'm seeing no objection. Let's move that forward to the September regular business meeting agenda for a second reading for repeal and move to our next agenda item, 4.2 policy 103. Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you. So for both policy 103, non-discrimination in school and classroom practices, and policy 248, unlawful harassment, I'm going to ask our solicitor to come forward to talk about the purpose of that. And if needed, we can also, again, have our Director of Human Resources, who is the designated district's Title IX coordinator, to insert his opinions or answer questions if necessary.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. All right, so with both policy and administrative regulation 248 and then also policy 103, these policies were identified as needing some revision in order to comply with the new Title IX regulations that went into effect last month. The new Title IX regulations just very, very generally require that when there are allegations of sexual harassment that the school district receives, that there be a predictable and fair process for how those complaints are going to be handled from the time period that they get reported throughout the investigation process all the way through the determination and appeal process. So over the summer and primarily in July and August, We were going through the new regulations and prepared training materials, because one of the things that was required under the new Title IX regulations was that individuals internally at the district be properly trained on what the investigation process needs to be. So back in August, with Mr. Stitzel's assistance, we put together that training, and the appropriate individuals internally were trained. Now we're at the point where we needed to just bring some policies into line to comply with what the procedures are, and the procedures that the administrators have been trained to follow when there's allegations of sexual harassment. So we'll start with policy 103, and just give me a moment to get there in the agenda, and I'll give you a high level as to what the changes are here. So policy 103, just very generally, is the district's non-discrimination policy that applies to students. And the policy, in the authority, clearly sets out that the district doesn't discriminate on the basis of any protected class. They're all listed there. Now, and then a Title IX coordinator is designated in the policy, and the Title IX coordinator is the Director of Human Resources. And what will happen is, in the administrative regulation, once it's put together, there will be a process through which general complaints of discrimination are handled, and then there will be a separate procedure that's referenced for how complaints of sexual harassment get handled. And sexual harassment is a form of discrimination. Sexual harassment in a severe form is considered discrimination. So the new Title IX regulations only require that the district handle sexual harassment allegations a certain way. The other processes that were previously in place for investigating other claims of discrimination still remain. So as we put that administrative regulation together, which will be available by the time we get to the second reading next month, it will be more clear which process is which. But just very generally, the goal here was to ensure that the proper procedures are in place so that when there is a complaint of discrimination, whether that be discrimination on the basis of any type of protected class or discrimination on the basis of sex via sexual harassment, that we have policies and procedures in place that are legally sufficient. I can go through to policy 248 now, if that would be helpful, or Mrs. Goldman, if you'd like to stop and take 103 first, however you prefer.
Yeah, let's stop for a second and just see if anybody has, I'm not sure if people read both policies collectively or sort of did them one by one. So let me see if there are any questions on 103 first. Avery, I'm looking at you. You're right next to me on the screen. Do you have any questions about policy 103?
I do have one quick question, and it's more with the title, so we can kind of put this up for discussion if we feel like it needs to. But when it specifies in school and classroom, but then the policy goes into talk about like Boy Scouts and other activities throughout the district. So I feel like the name can be a little bit misleading to what is actually discussed in the policy when we go into these like other activities that are available that aren't necessarily through the school or in the classroom.
Okay, I think that's a good point. One other way, I'll just put it out there for the committee. One other way that I've seen this policy titled is equal opportunity and non-discrimination affecting students. And so maybe that is, I've seen it titled both ways. So there's no right or wrong way to do that, but maybe the second option, more accurately reflects the scenarios that Avery mentioned. Would you say that's correct, Avery?
Yeah, I would say that is correct. Just when I think of like sports and Boy Scouts and things like that, I don't necessarily associate that with like classroom material.
Sure.
Okay. Did you have any other questions, Avery? No? Okay. Mrs. McMenamin?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Thank you. Jeff?
No, Mr. Diallo, that was very helpful because this is, I know this, I'm just sort of talking it out to help myself sort of better understand. This is procedural, obviously very important to comply with updated Title IX requirements, if you will. The AR, which will be next month, as you said, will be helpful to see it, how it will be presented and executed. My questions were answered earlier when I initially read the materials and had the opportunity to talk with some folks just about the policy in and of itself, which is not what we're talking about tonight, which was last revised in August 2016. So I think I'm good for now.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Liz, did you have any questions or thoughts? Actually, Avery was talking about a title there.
I do like her suggestion for changing the title affecting students. I think that does more accurately reflect what's contains within the policy. I'm just curious, I don't have any question, but I was curious why we single out Boy Scouts.
Sure. So the U.S. Department of Education has put out for years a model non-discrimination notice. And in there, the Boy Scouts are specifically called out. And my sense is that, and I've had discussions with the folks at the Office for Civil Rights as to why that specific needs to be in there. And there's a separate law. It's called the Boy Scout Equal Access Act. That it's one of two things. Either the Boy Scout Equal Access Act specifically, requires that the Boy Scouts be called out, or a second possibility is that somewhere, sometime, someone must have tried to treat the Boy Scouts differently, and there must have been litigation around the topic, and now they get called out specifically in the Office for Civil Rights' model notification. When it talks about we provide equal access to the Boy Scouts and other designated youth groups, they're actually in statute, in the regulations, is a list of what those other groups are, and there's literally hundreds of them. And the Girl Scouts, just for everybody's reference, is one of them. But the specific language at the Office for Civil Rights, I wouldn't even say suggests, I would say that they insist upon, is that it needs to specifically say the Boy Scouts and other designated youth groups. And I have had instances with them in the past where they'll be investigating something else. Maybe they'll be investigating Title IX or an issue with the district's website. And if they find this notification, this non-discrimination notification, they will make you change it to reflect the language that they feel it needs to say in order to leave and not have corrective action. So it's a legal requirement through the Office for Civil Rights. That's the short way of saying what I just said.
There was actually litigation right in Philadelphia several years ago that may be germane to this conversation related to the use of a building that was subsidized by the city. Not to say it's one and equal, but there's been a lot in the news, specific all the way up to the Supreme Court as it relates to that particular organization.
Does that help you, Liz, with your question? And did you have any others?
I haven't, and then just when we go to the other designated youth groups, does that include religious groups?
I can pull up the list and I will circulate it to the group.
Okay.
Any other questions, Liz? That sounds like something that Mr. Diazio will get back to us on.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Thanks, Liz. Susan?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. So when I opened up the link to the policy itself, the title of it says equal opportunity and non-discrimination. So, I'd be comfortable with changing that to equal opportunity. I don't know if, what's involved or if it matters to say practices affecting students. I mean, the purpose of it, I could go either way on that, but I just want to be clear for tonight, we'll be recommending that this be brought to the full board for a first read, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I mean, to the way it's titled is different from how the agenda is titled. And I think that in the past, the old policy that we had up till now it began with non-discrimination. So we may just want to, part of our meeting tonight, we can change the title of it and bring it to the board with the changed title And that doesn't affect the timing, right, Mr. Diazio?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Right. In fact, both policies on our agenda for tonight have different titles on their drafts than they do on the agenda, because the agenda reflects their current title. And it looks like the policy documents that we're looking at tonight reflect a different title. I assume that was by design.
Yes. So previously with the policy 103, it was just titled non-discrimination in school and classroom practices. We added the equal opportunity piece simply because equal opportunity was contemplated in the policy. And then and I know we'll get to it in a moment, but 248 was titled unlawful harassment, and we just changed it to harassment, sort of to reflect, we have a policy 247 on hazing. We have a policy 249 on bullying.
Right.
We don't call out unlawful hazing or unlawful bullying, things like that. It's our harassment policy. That's what it is. So we thought that name better reflected the substance.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I remember when we went through that on the policy committee and Mrs. Stern took the lead in changing us from anti-bullying to bullying. And I'm just wondering when the time is up for us to go from anti-hazing to hazing. So it's like we've got 2 out of the 3 legs of the stool on their way to being repaired here. Maybe if it's a non-substantive change, the policy could be a hazing instead of anti-hazing as well. And then we'll have that cleaned up. I would like to, I don't have any questions. On 103, was going to actually reference the fact that the proposed change in title was not included in the description on the agenda. And so that's why maybe going forward, it helps to call that out as a change so that it eliminates any potential confusion. But I'd like to sort of get board member consensus here on the proposed new title that Avery had suggested, or that Ed had phrased, but it was based on Avery's suggestion. Can you repeat what it was actually, Mr. Diazio, please?
Sure. It could be, one option would be equal opportunity and non-discrimination affecting students. And one thing to keep in mind is that in a future meeting, policy 104, which is not on the agenda tonight, is the non-discrimination policy that relates to staff. That would be non-discrimination in employment practices and things like that. So when we get to that point, whatever the committee decides is an appropriate title for this policy will be consistent. And perhaps 104 would be titled, equal opportunity and non-discrimination affecting staff. That would be, but just keep in mind that there are 2 policies. One relates to students and one relates to staff.
Okay, so committee, can we get some quick feedback on that? Would anybody have an objection to changing the title as Mr. Diazio has just laid out? No, I'm not seeing any objection. So can we try that? I guess this is just one sort of a little bit of a sidebar question. 104, because it relates to staff, is it's not in the staff section of the policy manual. Is it just 104 because it needs to be sequenced after 103? Usually we go into the different hundreds when it comes to staff.
Well,
Sure.
Amy, this one's not in the 200s either.
No, I know that was also a question. So I was going to get to that.
Yeah, one of the reasons we put it in the program section, so with 104, when it comes to staff, one thing to keep in mind is, and I should have mentioned this a moment ago, it's not just staff, because it can also be, for example, a job applicant who doesn't get the job, but believes that there was something in the process that was discriminatory. This policy could govern that. So it's generally one policy affects students and one policy affects adults. And we can call it, we can find the appropriate title, but that's one of the reasons why we didn't put this, why the staff policy doesn't go in all the employee sections, because it can have broader reach than just employees. And with respect to students, a lot of what a student might be alleging is discriminatory would be curriculum materials could be discriminatory. It's not just a person-on-person type of activity that can be discriminatory. So it just it feels more appropriate to be in the program section. I will say, there are some school districts that put it in the 200 or the employee sections. It's just much more common to see it in the program section, but you can go either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine. I don't know if anybody else objects, but I thought it was helpful to explain why it is in a place where we otherwise might think those policies would go. So is everybody else okay? We're going to, I think at this point, move this forward for first reading with the further changed title to the policy. And we will, unless I see any objections, speak now or forever hold your peace. We're good? Okay, so then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, item 4.3. Dr. Stevenson, or actually we'll leave it with Mr. Diazio. Do you want to continue on with back with some context for policy 248?
Okay, so 248 is the harassment policy in the student section of the manual. In looking at the policy, you'll notice there are many definitions. I think it's important just that the committee members know these definitions: sexual harassment, sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking. Those definitions are taken directly out of the Title IX guidance. Those aren't definitions that we made up. Those are legal definitions. The rest of the policy, the guideline section of the policy, just provides very general guidance as to what do you do. What are some general guidelines that should govern the reporting and investigation of sexual harassment and other types of harassment, not just sexual harassment. So the guidelines talk about things like the investigation should be prompt. There should be no retaliation. Confidentiality should be, handled in accordance with legal obligations. Those types of very general statements are included in the guidelines. And then as we move to the regulation, more specific reporting procedures as to who you report to. And then once there is reporting, what the investigation looks like and what the consequences are if there is a finding of harassment. All of that is listed in the administrative regulation. You will note that there is a hyperlink in the middle of the guidelines section of the policy that says that claims of sexual harassment get handled in accordance with the grievance process, which is on the district's website. And we included the link on the district's website where you can find all of that. Title IX, the new regulations require that all of the training materials and a summary of our grievance process be posted on the website. So that's why it's got its own tab on the website, and Mr. Stitzel and Mr. Petiti were able to help us get all of that up on the website. So all of the information is populated on that link that's embedded in the policy. So instead of just duplicating everything in this policy, we thought it would be easier just to refer to the link on the website.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That provides some context for this policy. I'll go back and start with Avery. Do you have any questions about this policy?
No questions.
Okay, thanks. Mrs. McMenamin?
None for me.
Okay. Mr. Jubileer?
No, just say we discussed the title issue on this one, similar to the others. It may just be keeping harassment, like you said, Mrs. Golden, with the consistencies of the other policies that we've been discussing or have recently been updated. Getting rid of the word anti or unlawful, maybe like the agenda versus the title. We have that issue here as well.
Okay. Mrs. Duffy, thank you, Jeff.
Should I comment on a question for the AR, or do you want to do that separate? Can you hear me?
Well, I don't.
I'm happy to take questions on either, unless.
Okay, I just have a question on the accompanying AR. It was just under investigation and response to complaints. It talks about complaints of harassment by a student against another student. And
Yeah.
I was wondering where do we have student against an administrator or a teacher or coach?
So just as we're going to bring policy 104 back next month, there will be another policy next month that relates to harassment either of staff members or by staff members. So that will be forthcoming next month.
So question is, should that be in, I mean, a question is, should that be anything in the title that the harassment is related student to student?
It could be. We certainly could do that. Generally, the policies that are in the 200 section, for example, hazing, bullying, harassment, we've never called out the titles separately, but we could put what I think we could do is, what might be helpful is to add a statement to the policy or the AR that says complaints of harassment other than student on student are handled in accordance with, and then we can cross-reference to the other policy. Maybe would that address your concern?
Yes.
Yep. I think that's a good point. And I think we actually did that in the bullying policy. And
We did,
now that I'm
yes.
thinking about it, I think that was either Ms. Duffy or Mrs. Stern, one of you. I remember you bringing that up when we looked at the bullying policy. So maybe we'll go back and look at the bullying policy and see what it says and incorporate similar language in this one.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's not a substantive change, is it, Mr. Diazio?
No, we can add that in and send this forward to first read.
Was that in the policy or the AR in bullying?
It was probably in the policy. I can check while we're.
It might have even been in, I was thinking in the purpose or something. I mean, who knows, but
Thought I had that printed out. Hold on.
Looking it up right now. So I think it was in the policy.
And again, Amy, this one will be for first read. The agenda didn't quite say that, but we'll be moving this forward for first read.
yes, I see that the past two agenda item description should say what the
Recommended action is.
recommended action is. So I don't know who put the agenda together, but for items 4.2 and 4.3, just future note to please include the recommended action in the description, if that's okay.
Yes, we can make sure we do that.
Well, yeah, Amy, I don't know if you have any further comment. Liz, you were done with your comments, correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
want to give Ed a chance. Ed, do you want to, are you close to finding that, or do you want us to come back to it? We can come back to it, or just have you go ahead and give us an update later or something?
Yeah, I'll do that because I'm not seeing it quickly here.
Okay, all right, so Susan?
Those were my only comments.
Okay. All right, so then committee, with the addition of the provision about this being applicable just to student on student, I think we can move this forward for a first read for a board. Do I have everybody on board for that? Yes, okay. All right then. So I don't know if we have any new business. No?
I did find it was in the policy here, and Mrs. Goldman, you were correct. It was in the purpose of the policy. So we can do the same thing if the committee's okay with that for the harassment policy.
Yeah, it sort of fits with purpose anyway, and it jumps right out at you as the first thing you read when you open the policy. So thank you very much, Mr. Diazio. I think that was, as I remember, the only change for that one.
Yep.
In addition to the title. Okay, so our last item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any, Mr. Batchelor?
No
Nope.
additional, no, not for policy, nope.
No public comment. Okay, terrific. So thank you, everybody. I guess with that, we will conclude the policy meeting for now, and we'll see you next month.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time and input.